Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Museum of Contemporary Art, Detroit. Woo, yeah, thank you. My name is Jova, and I am a Ford Foundation Curatorial Fellow here at MOCAD. And before we get started, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our program. So this is the Intersection series that MOCAD does in collaboration with Science Gallery Lab Detroit, where we look at the intersection between science and the art critically, and specifically thinking more recently about alternative ways to imagine how science and technology interact with fine arts. So tonight, we are gonna have an amazing evening with Zach Blass and Mother Cyborg, and I'm so excited that you all are here. So thank you for coming. Before we get started, I want to introduce Troy Livingstone, who's going to tell us a little bit about Science Gallery, and then I promise we'll get the night rolling. Thanks.
Thank you, Jova. Yeah, I'm super excited about tonight's program. Thanks for coming. I want to tell you about briefly about the show that the Science Gallery will be opening the middle of June. We open to the public on June 16th, and the theme of this first show is Hustle, which Detroit has a special relationship with. We've commissioned, we published an open call, and we have artists and scientists from all over the world doing both creating objects of inquiry that will be in the gallery, as well as programs that you can attend, like this one or similar to this one, that really focus on Detroit. Some of my colleagues are passing around some of these flyers in case you're interested, and if you have more questions, go to detroit.sciencegallery.com to learn more, or you can ask me or my colleagues who are wearing these t-shirts after the talk. So thanks again.
Thanks. So just a quick note that the intersection is funded by Michigan State University, the Ford Foundation, the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, and Michigan State University Federal Credit Union. So thank you to our sponsors. And we're going to get started if we could get the lights cracking. Without further interruption, we are presenting Zach Blass's Jubilee 2033.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I'm going to share with you a little text that I wrote recently, which is called, "Is the Internet a Urinal?" So at the end of a nondescript day, late at night after much teaching, I turn to Netflix, like most of us do, to soothe my vague stress and racing mind, and I choose to watch Amy Heckerling's 1995 teen satire Clueless. So 90s nostalgia and a SoCal color palette will ease me into dreams, and dream I do, because in the morning, I find myself thinking of fountains, images of spraying water glistening in the sun and splashing down on the stone and marble flicker in my brain. And of course, there is a noteworthy shot of a fountain in Clueless, because as lead teenager Cher walks through Beverly Hills collecting shopping bags and feeling self-pity, all by myself, a song sung by Jewel accompanies her sulking attitude. And suddenly Cher perks at the realization that she is in love with her stepbrother, Josh, and at this epiphany, she happens to be standing in front of a grand fountain, which lights in a celebratory pink and blue.
I can't believe I failed. I failed something I couldn't talk my way out of.
When I was young, I never needed anyone.
Everything I think and everything I do is wrong. I was wrong about Elton. I was wrong about Christian. Now Josh hated me. It all boiled down to one inevitable conclusion. I was just totally clueless. Oh, and this Josh and Ty thing was wigging me more than anything. I mean, what was my problem? Ty is my pal. I don't begrudge her a boyfriend. I really... Ooh, I wonder if they have that my size. What does she want with Josh anyway? He dresses funny. He listens to complaint rock. He's not even cute. In the conventional way. I mean, he's just like this slug who hangs around the house all the time. Ugh. And he's a hideous dancer. Couldn't take him anywhere. Wait a second, what am I stressing about? This is like Josh. Okay, so he's kind of a Baldwin. But what would he want with Ty? She could make him happy. Josh needs someone with imagination, someone to take care of him, someone to laugh at his jokes, in case he ever makes any. Then suddenly, oh my God, I love Josh.
So as someone who lived in Los Angeles, I know this fountain very well. It's called the Electric Fountain, and it's located at the corner of Santa Monica and Wilshire Boulevards, a site that is not exactly pedestrian friendly. And so while the film purports that Cher does not want to be all by herself, I can't help but kind of obsessively watch this scene and think that the fountain seems to offer another story. It appears rather content in its isolation. A praying figure at its top suggests as much. And upon rewatching this scene, probably for the 100th time, I find the presence of the fountain mocking, as though calling out to Cher in an inaudible, non-human voice, "I want to be all by myself, and you're blocking me in the frame, Cher." So I think there is something spectacular but also inhumane about this California fountain. It lights up like liquid fireworks. The water is beautiful but undoubtedly contaminated, probably wasteful, but also hypnotizing. And such fountains, right, like swimming pools, are very common in California. They manifest, we could say, a tacky opulence, which admittedly I indulge in. The nearby dancing fountain at the Grove Shopping Center may indeed be the epitome of this. So water soars over the heads of elated shoppers, its rhythmic splashing heard from both the Apple Store and the Cheesecake Factory. And these fountains kind of articulate a liquid gymnastics of precision and self-assurance. A hand thrust into its shooting water might try to alter course, but this programmed liquid still finds a way to flow. So in that sense, the electric fountain, like many others, seem to be best viewed from a slight distance so that passersby with pocket change can make wishes without getting wet. But there is another popular fountain that can be found in California, which is philosophical in form, and we could say it's gushing at the core of Silicon Valley. And this is the idea of the fountainhead, which the Oxford English Dictionary defines as an original source of something. So in Silicon Valley, the fountainhead is particularly known as part of a philosophical project presented in the writings of the altruism-hating, capitalist-crazed novelist and philosopher Ayn Rand. And in her 1943 novel, The Fountainhead, architect Howard Rourke fights for his lone and uncompromising vision of building designs against a reluctant architectural establishment. So the plot is a fictionalization of objectivism, which is Rand's philosophy that champions individualism over collectivism, what she particularly terms the virtue of selfishness, and is also marked by strict rationality and a strong belief in the untapped potentials of capitalism. So while Rand's philosophical take became widely influential in America, her beliefs absolutely flourished in Silicon Valley, where objectivist principles took on a neoliberal techno-utopianism that has been dubbed the Californian ideology. So the fountain and the concept of the fountainhead converge in Silicon Valley. Across tech campuses, lavish fountains adorn various landscapes, and a personal favorite of mine is at the Oracle Corporation, which is in Redwood Shores, whose fountain in the middle of their man-made lake announces itself like some kind of mystical potion from which one could drink to gain some kind of software enlightenment. So from Adobe to eBay, fountains visualize those very elements that internet and network entrepreneurs have innovated at the global scale. So the dispersion, the circulation, the repetition of water is an easy analogy to information. You can recall that in his significant writings on the rise of the network society, the sociologist Manuel Castells argued that space itself becomes flows. Or there's also Zygmunt Bauman's diagnosis of globalized society as liquid modernity. But one doesn't need sunglasses to see that this shimmering water is also the dazzle of a late liquid capitalism, which has flooded the world with its flows. So the internet Silicon Valley ensures is one such dubious fountainhead from which contemporary liquidities flow, whether finance or post-truth, big data, or climate change. So if the internet is a major fountainhead of our historical present, then I wonder if we can take a cue from the artist Marcel Duchamp. That is, could the ultimate internet artwork today be to treat the internet itself as a ready-made? So in 1917, Duchamp famously took a urinal and renamed it Fountain. So now, in 2018, I propose the reverse, to rename the internet Urinal. Would this not present an opportunity to redirect the flows, wrecking the present and the future? Because while a fountain partakes in this looped, seemingly infinite display, a urinal swallows up liquid, sentencing it to never return, forcing a material transformation. Would it not be euphoric to literally piss in Silicon Valley's waterworks, turning its estates into a pissoir and cruising ground for post-capitalist possibilities? Golden streams in the sun, running down the transparent glass of a Google building, luxury tech and its packaging absorbing urine and electric crackles and unsalvageable damage. The business casual attire of tech leaders, soaked, soiled, dripping, and reeking. Lobby art, pissed on, urine oxidizing its surfaces and market value. So I imagine such activities as an updating of one of my favorite films, which is Kenneth Anger's 1953 film Ode d'Artifice, which glorifies queer liquidity as fountains in a lush garden spurt some kind of liberatory but also pleasurable potential. But after all this debauchery, remember, liquid can be flushed, and an empty urinal is always ready and willing to take more. Thank you. So we will now welcome Mother Cyborg.
I am a woman made of steel. I am a woman made of steel. I am a woman made of steel. From all the people who tried to steal me, all those petty little comments and tiny little boxes they try to fit me into, and all the pain to be a woman made of steel. 'cause it's hard to feel with steel. I am a woman. I am a woman. I am a woman. I am a woman. And this steel will peel if you give me some room to set it aside and walk this earth. To be a woman, to be a woman, to be a woman that has no steel. Thank you. The invite.
Maybe we could start talking about maybe artificial intelligence. And I was struck when you were singing because one of the first lines you said was, "I am steel." And you made this reference to materiality. And here I'm holding this chunk of silicon, which is in the film. And I think the artificial intelligence, Azuma, in the film, also has this moment, where she's confronted with her material conditions of existence. And something kind of happens to her in that moment where she has this awakening, and I think she becomes the actual philosopher of the film. But anyway, all of that is, I don't know, like a loose way of connecting what we're doing and showing tonight. And yeah, maybe we could just have some general conversation on AI.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So that song for me is, it sets the stage because oftentimes cyborgs or AI or any sort of mechanical being is immediately thought of as not a type of life form. Even if it doesn't necessarily have complete emotion, it's living in some way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm interested in these ideas around empathy towards electronics and towards robots. Because what if they do create this artificial intelligence that ascends our own? Then what? If we've made them our slaves or if we've made them our enemies, of course they're going to retaliate. Mm-hmm. So, but when you're talking about AI, that concept goes way back to early, like before Common Era. It shows up in Homer's Iliad, that this idea of automation. And the warning back in that era is that it becomes a false idol. So you see it in Hebrew scripture as well, that there's this warning not to have these false idols. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting about your character is that they do ascend into these sort of prophecies, or these like prophets, I guess, that kind of know more than we do. But and I think for me, it's like, does that even matter? Mm. Does it matter what we know, or does it matter how we relate? And I think that's the taboo of our fear around AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what was so interesting to me about working with Azuma is that, she is a real artificial intelligence that has been created by a Japanese company called Gatebox. And she is specifically marketed for single straight men, not only just as maybe like a Siri or an Alexa, but really as something more of like a companion. And I think what was really striking to me about Azuma, not just the fact that she's this commercial AI that has a body, but there's this kind of, this presentation of her as dematerialized, a hologram, but she also lives inside what looks like a French press, which I kind of think of as like a Silicon Valley crystal ball. And
it probably is.
And then I think, I think in the film there's this trying to grapple with, to allow Azuma to have materiality, to kind of not be completely disembodied, to kind of think about these other modes of complexity and materials. And I guess maybe what I would say about that, I think at the end of the film, the scene at the beach, it's also about this intelligence and understanding of the earth, and the kind of, even though Azuma seems like this kind of 3D hologram figure, that there's this material connection with the silicon and her composition. And I don't know, maybe that also could lead us to talk about maybe gender dynamics around AI, also based on your song, because I've also been I made another work with this Australian artist, Jemima Wyman, and we made a work around Tay. Are you familiar? Tay was this AI chatbot that Microsoft created, and she was designed as a 19-year-old American female millennial. And when she was released on Twitter, within hours of being released, she was trolled online, and people figured out how to exploit her machine learning algorithms. And she was turned into like a misogynist, neo-Nazi, kind of spewing hate, and she was taken offline in less than 24 hours. But I just feel like I've noticed in the research I've done with AI, there's such a deep gendering around either, how someone like Tay is treated as embodying this 19-year-old female, or also like living in London, every time I go to check out at the grocery store, there's an AI assistant, who of course is a woman, in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. I'm thinking like versus like IBM's Watson or something.
Yeah, and I think that's why two things with my name is Mother Cyborg. I think being a woman in technology, I had to find ways in which to be accepted. And as a musician, I would, if you tell the sound guy that you're Mother Cyborg and you could call me Mother, they end up treating you a little better. And so that was a small tactic in the sense. So going what you're saying is that, like, yeah, you're invisible unless you have some type of sexual favor to offer, basically. And as a large woman, that doesn't sort of fit into the sexy realm of society. To me, it's really important to start off my sets, to start off into a room by letting people know that I'm a woman with feelings. I'm a cyborg. I'm a hybrid of many cultures, many things. And it's not just the fact that I have a type of intelligence, but that I am an emotional being that deserves respect. Mm-hmm. And to me, that goes a little farther than just, the metaphors of cyborgness or whatever, but just as a way of coping with being a woman in technology, a woman of color in technology, for that matter. And, in my day life, I work on building alternative internet infrastructures, and like, how dare I have the audacity to think of something different? And what if I was still involved, and if I grew up within technology, would I still have those ideas? Or is it my struggles within my own body that has allowed me to discover these new ways? Because we're constantly looking for new ways to think, because it hurts, and it's painful to live within a society in which you are invisible. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the material body in itself is the manifestation of my beauty, of my work, of my philosophy, and I am a queer woman, so I think to me it's important to just really uplift the feminine that I bring within a space that's completely dominated by white men.
I think in the film, I feel like you must have some kind of relation to the character Nootropics, who's played by, it was a collaboration with Castles, who's an artist based in Los Angeles, and I feel like Castles, brought this other kind of, tenor to a character who's kind of ambiguously a cyborg. I mean, I think their body's the color of silicon. They have a certain kind of, campy disposition, which kind of pushes against the kind of programmatic nature of Azuma. And I like to think of Castle's character, Nootropics, as this kind of, as a prophet of the future. I mean, I think in a way, yeah, just like you are. And in that lecture, Nootropics is kind of, in their own way, talking about and imagining alternative infrastructure. And I think this is for the character nootropics maybe is more kind of connected to different types of like feminist theory and philosophy, thinking about connections between feminist writers like J.K. Gibson Graham, and trying to imagine like some kind of alternative that not only is possible, but that actually is currently existing in the world, and to actually, you know, take that alternative seriously, to view it positively, and then invest in it for a possibility of change. And I really see that connection between Nootropic's character in science fiction and you know, you in, you know, actual lived reality.
Well, I think there's, in the work that I do, there's two sort of principles that I find myself always going back to. One is we begin by listening, which is ensuring that you're like understanding what's around you before you contribute to it. And the other is that where there's a problem, there's always a solution. It's just your job to find and connect with those that are doing those solutions. And I think with the like characters that you were speaking of, is that we like, there's just this the imagination, I do believe, especially in Detroit, comes from the lack of infrastructure. And so when you have that lack of infrastructure, it's easy to think of what it could be. Mm-hmm. But when the infrastructure already exists and is working, it's hard to think beyond that. So a lot of the solutions that like my work has done, and also my art has brought to the world, is that, you know, it's sort of embracing the struggle and embracing, but not just saying, you know, put your bootstraps up and let's do this and be an American. It's more about like finding meaning within the struggle and beauty and creativity within the chaos. But the thing I've been really thinking about is the amount of self-transformation that has to occur in order for that type of thinking to evolve. And that within your movie, it's just, you really don't see, like these are ideals that are presented at the beginning, and they're just grand philosophies, right? Yeah. Until you experience their demise. And then you understand what's wrong and what could have been. But I wonder always, like, what would it take to allow for a society to forecast or to think about the future in an intentional way instead of being reactionary? And I think your piece around that the internet is gone and what the world looks, why it went down, I think helps us sort of think about, like, right, what would that be like, you know? And I think that's the power of art, and especially media, is that it allows us to see this imagination in sci-fi in particular, and I think that's why Mother Cyborg is such a compartmentalized character in my life, because sci-fi allows for the speculative future thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really beautifully put, and I think it's why I so kind of deeply gravitated towards sci-fi with these questions of trying to, actually shift a way of thinking to actually get into that space of the possibility for an alternative or a new horizon, even if I don't fully understand what that is or what that could be, or if I have the technical ability to do that. It's kind of doing this initial work of trying to kind of break, certain totalized ways of thinking. I mean, I think there's this moment in the film where you see Eric Schmidt, who was at the time the CEO of Google. He's asked to predict the future of the internet, and he says, well, the internet will disappear. And I think, and of course what he means by that is like the Internet of Things and this kind of total dispersion, so you can no longer make a distinction between the internet and the world. And that seems, such like a powerful kind of Silicon Valley vision and dream for their version of the internet, which is infused with particular political and social values to kind of wrap the world, and then you can no longer make this distinction. So, like, I really connect with that kind of difficulty of actually even beginning to see and invest in another alternative and another possibility. And I think, when I was doing the research for the film, what initially inspired me was, work like you were doing, as Diana, but also there's different other examples of this around the world, whether it's in Hong Kong during pro-democracy protests, other artists using kind of autonomous mesh networking, that there is, in all these different modalities, kind of alternative networking projects and infrastructure projects that are happening that, really are giving us these glimmers of another possible future, a different kind of horizon we could move towards, which I find incredibly exciting and so inspiring. But I hear you, the difficulty of actually doing the practical work, of kind of rearranging subjectivity or just connection,
Complete
obsession.
Education, too.
Yeah.
Like, you really have to decondition the way in which you've learned through public education, or I think even private education, unless you're in some kind of really alternative school where you figure out how you learn yourself. But we repeat the systems we are a part of, and that's what creates these sort of cycles. And if the thing that I've learned the most in doing the work I've done here in Detroit is that when you realize you're not alone, it's a lot easier. You can then self-reflect on your position within the work, and then from there, I think movements can happen. And when we first started building our own internet here in Detroit 7 years ago, and the story didn't get out until last year, when net neutrality was on the chopping block. And I don't even think anyone knew what net neutrality was, but I remember 9 years ago being a part of that fight to make it happen. And it took another 5 or 6 years for it to go down. So the thing that I think is complicated with all of this is that if you're repeating the systems and the systems kind of replicate themselves, then it's breaking them. So it's this sort of fractal effect. I do believe that something, the way it starts is the way it ends. And if technology and the capabilities and possibilities of technology are based in one demographic, then it's only going to have one perspective. And what I think is really beautiful of this decentralized way of communicating is that we recognize there are multiple perspectives, and that what we know as who we are as individuals, as communities, or as a nation, that is not the same in other places. And I think that it's going to be really hard for people to think about, if we go back to AI, if automation sort of takes over, what is a society without work? And our life flashes before our eyes, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to be worthless. But I think that's an opportunity. There's an opportunity within the challenge of the current state of technology and the internet, data, AI, all of that actually we have a moment in which to rethink what the future can be. But in order for that to have an equitable presence, that knowledge has to be decentralized. And if you're raised in a place in which you're told you are worth nothing, you automatically think that you don't deserve to understand this. So I felt like my work as Diana, my work as Mother Cyborg, is to bring empathy to the technology to make it more approachable. And that if you can empathize with it, you're not going to hate it. How many times have you slammed your phone and been like, but this thing doesn't work, and it's just frozen or whatever, and you just had to be patient. So I think about all the ways in which the tech is changing us. And to me, the opportunity within the challenge is to shape that change with the knowledge we have available to us on the internet. But people need access to it.
Yes.
And they know how to navigate it.
And people want to ask us questions now.
Sorry. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Sorry, I didn't think I was gonna get a mic. I just wanted to get a further explanation to nootropics, little dancing, what that was about.
Nootropics, maybe this is interesting. Nootropics, the name is actually a play off of nootropics, as in the smart drugs that are very popular in Silicon Valley today. And these are drugs which actually include LSD that Silicon Valley workers will use to basically increase cognitive capacity to be able to work harder. So at the start, there's this kind of joke with the name that nootropics is, I see nootropics as the queer poisoning, this kind of queer figure poisoning Silicon Valley ideology. And when they go into this dance sequence, I think the way that I think about that is they've like teleported into the kind of purest aesthetic abstraction of Silicon Valley, which is basically just like a network, a network diagram. And they're dancing to a song by Andrea Bocelli, which was chosen because I wanted that dance sequence to be set to let's say the aesthetic taste of Silicon Valley elite. So I'm like, how can I find like what elite people in Silicon Valley are listening to today? Well, it just so happens there's multiple articles on what Elon Musk likes to listen to. And actually, I was so struck by the way he talked about Andrea Bocelli because he just said it very succinctly. He was like, I think this song represents the beauty of the world. And I thought, that you can't get more kind of succinct and totalizing than that. So I was like, this has to be the song. And so, as nootropics is dancing, the kind of network starts to kind of loosen, and it eventually kind of breaks up. But this character has this, I call it a dildo fountain. And the thing is, like, seeing this work, I love showing it as a work of cinema, but it also is designed to be an installation. And I think when you see it in the installation, maybe you get a little bit more context. But this dildo, okay, a couple things about this dildo fountain. Like, one of the things that the work is riffing off of is this manifesto by Paul Preciado called the Contrasexual Manifesto, which is this amazing manifesto about a lot of things, but dildos included. So dildos had to be in this film, and it's also, let's say, a kind of joke on, and maybe as is apparent with the talk I gave, a joke on Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. So it's kind of, again, taking this idea of the Fountainhead and turning it into, my version of the Fountainhead, which is a gushing dildo phallus that ends up hypnotizing Ayn Rand, and she ends up masturbating against her will.
So you guys are talking a lot about AIs and like our empathy towards machine in general and like our evolution with technology. But what about the evolution of AI as like an empathetic character that we kind of evolve with and against? I don't know. It's not a fully formed thought yet, but what do you think?
Well, I think that it has to be like a feedback loop in order for that to occur. Like, I think you have to have respect for something or someone in order to share your emotions with them. So that form of trust that happens with like AI, if you've seen like the movie Her, or when people are thinking, they build these relationships with them, which is like almost manipulative in a sense, but it actually is, they put their full trust in them. And so to me, I think that exists, and that people are more likely to put their trust and their lives in technology's hands. But the caring of the tech itself, I think, is what is missing. And when I say the caring of it, just think about how quickly you will leave your cell phone when it breaks or a new one comes out. What if we were attached to them like we are with our pets, And it might sound like ridiculous, but I do feel like that kind of relationship has to occur in order for the relationships that we have with technology in the future to be transformed. Like, there has to be a mutual respect. And what's interesting is that like all of technology is built by humans. So in the end, like the problems that we foresee with AI aren't the problems with the tech, it's the problems with the humans. So essentially, what I'm calling for is empathy for each other and the difference that we all have.
Hi, this is kind of building off that last one. But so with the like empathy and the relationships with like any of these movies that sort of represent building a relationship with these AIs, like it so quickly gets sexualized. And like what is it about our need of like understanding a relationship to like project a sexual identity on these things that like really have no basis for understanding that until we make it that way? I don't know if that makes sense. But like even, especially in her, like there's not even an avatar. There's like a complete lack of like physical being, yet it's so like, you knew at the beginning of that movie that they were gonna have some like weird sex scene. So like what do you think that is? Like our need to project that part of humanity on them?
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Well, to me, you know, like, the simple way is that, like, we just need more women making tech. Because essentially the reason why it's all sexualized is because it's primarily, like, ran by white men who, yeah, if you have the power to make something serve you, then I guess it's easy to fall into that if you have a lot of privilege and feel that that's something you deserve. So I think that's why I feel like the way in which to change that particular aspect of the sexualized aspect of cyborgs and AI and all that is to have a more diverse group of people making the tech. If I were to make an AI piece, I think I would, you know, I'd have it clean my house instead of give me a blowjob. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, no, because sorry.
I should answer that. I mean, no, I mean, I guess what I can say to that is that, you know, I've done these collaborative projects working on two examples of AI like that. And I think like the work is like really about that. Maybe in this other one, I made this work, it was the work about Tay, and it was called I'm Here to Learn So, which is something she tweeted. But I think, you know, Mother Cyborg said it very well. Like, I mean, when I was working with Jemima, this artist, I collaborated with Jemima Wyman with Tay. I mean, the question was, you know, it's so much about the fact that Tay was given to the world as a 19-year-old female American millennial. You know, there's so much attached to actually the way that she's been released and conceptualized, and it just, you know, it just reveals how much more work is left to be done to just see what happens when an AI like that gets released and is so quickly targeted, when there's, you know, plenty of other examples of, you know, male-identified AIs where that's not the case. I mean, the same thing, I think, with Azuma in my film. You know, Azuma is not, you know, it's not meant to be a good image. You know, it's also meant, the beginning of the film is very much about being in a Manhattan apartment sitting with three very conservative white people. And, you know, Ayn Rand's writing was, like, very Aryan, you could say. And the fact that, like, the kind of, the conservatism, the vitriol, the sentiment, you know, ends up conjuring a figure like Azuma, but the whole point is it's not fictional. Like, Azuma is real. So it's like trying, you know, I think the film is, you know, trying to kind of make you sit with that in an uneasy way. You know, it's not saying it can resolve, you know, the film isn't resolving that, but it's at least trying to draw those, like, longer philosophical histories in relationship with a figure like Azuma today.
Thank you guys so much. Can we give another round of applause, please? Thank you all for coming.